So you have your bike, you have your route, and now it's time to pack everything you need. While everyone is different with different comfort levels and tolerances for the ever-changing conditions that bikepacking in the UK brings, there are a few things to think about when packing your bike with the gear you will need. Let's start with some essential clothing items and the best way to approach what to bring. You might have heard that in the UK, pretty much all over the place, the weather is not always the best and often isn't always predictable. You see, when bikepacking around the UK, one day it might be sunny, one day it might be rainy or just freezing cold, or perhaps windy. The temperature around the UK can vary and is normally a few degrees warmer in the south from, say, the north. So using a layering system is going to be the best route to be able to provide as much comfort while on a UK bikepacking adventure. Using the layering system is going to make the times where the weather is not the best that little more tolerable. The layering system designed to keep you comfortable and protected in varying weather conditions. You can add or remove layers as needed to regulate your body temperature. When you are active, you may start with fewer layers to avoid overheating. Or when the weather gets colder, you can add layers for warmth. If you start to sweat, you can remove layers to prevent moisture buildup, especially in the cold conditions where sweat can make you feel even colder. By using a layering system, you can adapt to the changing weather conditions and stay comfortable and protected during your bikepacking adventures. You don't have to wear lycra or cycling specific clothing either, but it's worth investing in some fast drying clothes for your adventure for when you do get wet. Also, when out on longer bikepacking adventures, these fast drying clothes are great when it comes to washing day. After washing, hang on your bike and let the wind dry them. There is no one rule that works for everyone, but I think expecting that it is impossible to stay 100% dry all the time while riding the bike. However much waterproof jackets, trousers, shoes you buy, eventually you will get wet. Having multiple layers and fast drying clothes is the best option for a comfortable ride. A good waterproof jacket is essential when bikepacking in the UK, wherever you might decide to cycle. And not just to keep the rain off of you, but also the wind. The UK landscape changes quite a lot, from rolling countryside to moorland to exposed mountain landscapes. You can be at sea level or a couple thousand feet above. As you climb here in the UK, the temperature will drop and is often a lot windier, so a good waterproof jacket is essential for keeping the worst off of you. When sourcing a waterproof jacket for UK bikepacking, I would recommend finding something that has a hood that can fit over a helmet and that is not too tight fitting, so you can add or remove layers underneath as needed. Having a loose fitted waterproof jacket also helps with the breathability of the jacket. Personally, I prefer to stay away from cycling specific waterproof jackets as they tend to be more performance orientated and tight fitting, not always offering that much protection and normally costing a lot more. I would also avoid waterproof jackets that have a net liner, as once that gets wet it takes forever to dry. You want your waterproof jacket to keep you as dry as possible, but also to dry as fast as possible. The next piece of clothing that is very important is the socks. Now, there are many different types of socks, different thicknesses and materials. You might prefer merino wool socks. Merino wool has a natural antibacterial property, which means it doesn't require as much washing. Good for when you're on the road for multiple days and might wear a pair of socks for multiple days. When it comes to socks though, the real key is not material type, but ultimately whatever sock you personally prefer, it's best to take a couple extra pairs than you think you might need. Better to have a couple extra clean pairs of socks than not. Being a small item and not taking up much space, it's a good idea to carry a few extra pairs because bikepacking in the UK will require some wet feet at some point, no matter how hard you try to keep them dry. Sticking with the feet for that little bit longer, shoes are an important choice, and whether you are wearing shoes with cleats or not, make sure these shoes are slightly on the bigger size for bikepacking. This not only allows for different thicknesses of socks during the different temperatures that you will no doubt experience bikepacking in the UK, but allow your feet to swell. Having extra room for your feet to swell will keep the shoes comfortable throughout the multiple days or weeks of bikepacking. The last thing you want are blistered feet from shoes that are too tightly fitted. A lot of cycling shoes, especially XC type shoes, that's cross-country shoes, can be on the smaller size as they are going for performance. When it comes to cleat specific shoes, I have personally found that shoes that are entry level and normally just use a Velcro strap tend to be wider than those with the boa strap or ratchet systems. I can't tell you which shoe you should buy because everyone's feet are different, but make sure they fit on the slightly bigger size. Also, with bikepacking in the UK, there is often times where you will need to hike your bike, so being comfortable for this is a must. And with the different types of terrain, from rocky terrain to bog to grass, it's important to make sure the shoes have a decent amount of grip. Personal experience for me is to avoid stuff that are fairly flat on the bottom, like the 510 shoes, as it makes hiking up wet grass practically impossible, and opt for something with a good amount of thick tread underneath. The UK bikepacking routes will often have streams or rivers that you might need to cross. In the drier months, these are normally quite shallow, but it still poses the question of taking a separate shoe or sandal used to make these streams or river crossings. I know at least one person who swears by riding in sandals all the time, but with all the rocky terrain, it's not something I'd recommend personally. In my experience with bikepacking in the UK, most streams or rivers can be crossed without getting your feet wet anyway, and often when you can't cross them without getting wet, there is often multiple crossings every 50 to 100 meters, for example, meaning you will be stopping to change those shoes quite often. But it's not a bad idea to carry a pair of sandals or beach shoes if you really don't want to get your feet wet. Bikepacking in the UK has its perks, and one of them perks is that we don't really have too many dangerous animals, no bears at least, but we do have a few insects that will give you a nibble, most of which won't cause you any long-term harm. It might just be a little itchy for a while. However, we do have ticks here in the UK, and with a lot of bikepacking routes going through grassy and wooded areas, tick bites are not always going to cause any issue, but being bit by a tick can cause you Lyme disease. You might not feel a tick bite, so you need to check your clothes and skin regularly, especially if coming through grassy or wooded areas. So why am I talking about ticks? Well, it can be a good idea to wear trousers and long sleeve t-shirts in the UK while bikepacking to reduce the chance of being bitten by a tick. Carrying a good jacket for warmth is essential for about 10 months of the year in the UK. In July and August, you can normally get away with just a waterproof jacket for the early morning or the setting up of camp, or when on higher ground. However, it is a good idea to carry either a down or some form of synthetic down, or anything that is insulated and is packable. Unless you are on a winter adventure in the UK, it is usually too warm to cycle in something like a down jacket. However, it is very useful for the evening when in camp, or if you are a cold sleeper, you can use it to sleep in. Whatever you decide is right for you to take, just make sure that you understand your own ability and tolerances to the conditions you will likely come up against while bikepacking in the UK. The temperatures can change throughout the year, from below freezing in the winter and around mid-20s in the summer. You need to make sure you check the conditions before heading out, and make sure you pack everything you need to keep warm, dry and safe. You will never be able to predict the weather for a whole 2 weeks, but as long as you have an idea of what it's going to be like, you can stay safe, warm and comfortable. Packing your gear onto your bike is just as important as to what to pack, and there is no one right way to do it apart from what I mentioned earlier, that you really need to spread the weight of the gear over the bike. But also it's very important to pack your clothes in a way that keeps them dry when they are on your bike and separate from wet clothes. Depending on how you set up your bike, then you might have a separate bag. But if you are using a saddle bag, then it's best to make sure you keep the used, wet, dirty clothes apart. Use an inner dry bag inside your saddlebag to keep things separate. It's really as simple as that. This goes with your tent. If you have a two-piece tent, keep the outer separate from the inner. A dry set of clothes is essential for safety here in the UK. Just remember, if you get wet, you get cold. There's no way around it. Always keep at least one set of clothes that you can get into once you are out of the rain. When packing your bike, make sure you think about how to keep the wet and dry gear separate. The thing with bike packing and packing all the gear onto your bike is often how will it fit. And while bikes can hold much more than you might expect, there is a couple of things to consider. One is the weight. Now, a fully loaded bike can be heavy, and a heavy bike is never going to be as easy to pedal up some of them steep climbs that you will find here around the UK. So while weight is important and it's a good idea to only carry the things you know you will need, which does take a bit of practice, that can only be practiced by going out and finding what you use and don't use. Saving weight on gear often just means paying more, unfortunately. So while weight isn't something to completely neglect, it's not something you should worry about too much. Try not to get hung up on saving a little bit of weight here and there that won't make that much difference on a fully loaded bike anyway. However, pack size is something that is more valuable. The less space something takes up, the better, as often it's space that is limited on the bike and not so much weight. There are certain items that typically take up a lot of space, like sleeping bags. A synthetic sleeping bag will typically take up much more space than a down sleeping bag, so it's worth investing in a sleeping bag that packs small. Tents have come a long way over the years, so you don't have to have a big bulky tent, and the tent, it's worth finding one that packs down small. You don't have to spend crazy money on tents to get that small pack size either nowadays. When packing a tent, pick for pack size over weight. When packing the clothes you want to wear, pack the clothes that pack up small. Tech tees, bib shorts, arm and leg warmers. The difference between a normal standard cotton t-shirt for something like a tech tee in size and weight starts to save you both space and weight, and are practical on and off the bike. They also perform better in damp conditions and dry fast, which is the best feature to look for clothes while bikepacking in the UK.